Hello everyone, I am Koen de Vente. I am a PhD student at the University of Amsterdam, and today we will be presenting the AIROGS challenge, which is on artificial intelligence for robust glaucoma screening. It is organized by these people and by these institutions, QAI, which is part of the University of Amsterdam, and the Amsterdam Medical Center, and it is also organized by the Rotterdam Ophthalmic Institute. And first, we will get some clinical background on the challenge from Hans Lemay.
Hello everyone, my name is Hans Lemay and I'm a glaucoma specialist at the Rotterdam Eye Hospital in the Netherlands. I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the AIROGS challenge, which stands for Artificial Intelligence Robust Glaucoma Screening Challenge. First of all, here's my financial disclosures. To give you an introduction about this challenge, we need to talk about the eye. Here's a model of the eye. Whenever we look at something in our surroundings, an image is projected onto the back of the eye in an inverted fashion. And the visual information, the light information, is then converted by photoreceptors into electronic signals that are passed through the retinal nerve fibers through the optic nerve to the brain, where they are further interpreted. Hence you have vision. Now, the part of the eye where all the retinal nerve fibers leave the eye is called the optic nerve head, which is the beginning of the optic nerve. Here you see a picture of a real optic nerve head that is healthy, and this pinkish, orangish tissue contains over 1 million healthy retinal nerve fibers. Here you see another example of a healthy optic nerve head. Now with glaucoma, you will see that the healthy tissue disappears, either locally or more generally, more advanced disease. And in this eye, you have no tissue left anymore. So you have a totally cupped disc, and this is an eye that is probably entirely blind. You see another example of very advanced glaucoma. To understand what the patient is experiencing, we need to talk about the architecture of the retinal nerve fiber layer. It looks like a fingerprint. And you can imagine that if part of the optic nerve head is damaged because of glaucoma, that the entire region of the retina is no longer connected with the brain, and you will get a visual field, a defect in that location. Here you can see the patient sitting in front of a visual field perimeter in which light stimuli are presented. And whenever the patient sees the light, she pushes the button, and then we get a printout that looks a bit like this. And this is not the right slide. This is the right slide. You can see an arcuate or bent defect in the visual field, and it's printed in black. And here you see an example of more advanced glaucomatous disease. Now, this is not what the patient experiences. The patient doesn't experience a black blob. To understand what the patient experiences, we look at these world-famous pictures of 2 kids crossing the street, running after the ball. And this is what actually happens. But if someone with glaucoma who has inferior visual field damage and looks at this eye, you see that the kids disappear. So the patient doesn't experience a black blob, but the brain fills in the gaps. And with more advanced disease, you get some fuzzy edges of the visual field because the brain no longer has enough information to fill in the gaps. That's what we think. So, population studies have shown that over 50% of glaucoma cases are undiagnosed. About 10% of these people were blind in both eyes. About 24% of all people with glaucoma will go blind in one eye. And we're expecting up to 110 million people or so by the year 2040. So there's going to be a dramatic rise in people with glaucoma. And the main cause for their blindness or the severe visual impairment is that they're detected too late. And once detected, they can be treated well to stop the disease or slow it down. There was an interesting study in Australia that showed that all undiagnosed cases had visited an optometrist or an ophthalmologist in the preceding year. This was done in a population-based study. So taken together, too many people are visually impaired by glaucoma. Our societies as a whole don't do a very good job at detecting glaucoma. Eye care professionals miss many cases, but once detected, the disease may be well controlled by medication, laser therapy, and surgical therapy. So there's good reason to do better screening programs. And the way we envisage is that in optic dispensaries, such as where they have fundus cameras, they take an image of the back of the eye. That, and here you see an image taken with such a camera, that the artificial intelligence that is built into the device, into the camera, or perhaps cloud-based, that it gives a classification, glaucoma suspect, and it gives advice, refer to ophthalmologist. And in case you have a healthy eye, the classification is the optic disc is within normal limits. Repeat the exam in several years, for instance, in the year 2024. In my wildest dreams, this will be possible on mobile phones, but we are not there yet. Is this realistic? Well, I think it is realistic. I'd like to show you that there was an interesting study performed in China where fundus photographs were used to train artificial intelligence to detect glaucoma. And it performed in Chinese with a high sensitivity, high specificity. But when the same AI was applied to different data sets of different ethnicity, the performance dropped considerably to a useless level, really. So what we needed was a different data set. That's what we thought. So we were able to acquire over 110,000 fundus photographs that were obtained during diabetic retinopathy screening programs in the United States. And they were of multi-ethnic origin, and they were taken on multiple cameras, and they were taken by multiple operators. So we thought we had a good set of fundus photographs to begin with. The computer is dead. We then had to grade them, and a grading algorithm or a grading program was developed in which 20 graders, highly trained graders, that were continuously monitored for quality, graded these over 110,000 images. And each image was individually graded by 2 randomly selected graders of a pool of 20, and they agreed whether it was referable glaucoma, no referable glaucoma, picture was ungradable. Their consensus was the final label. But if they didn't reach agreement, a third grader was called in, and that was an experienced glaucoma specialist, and his label was considered to be the final label. If the eye was classified as glaucomatous, they could indicate, the graders could indicate why they thought, based on which features they thought the eye was glaucomatous, but that is beyond the scope of the current challenge. So we think there is a good database for the current challenge, and thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Hans, for the nice presentation that you just gave. And I will briefly give a further motivation for the AIROGS challenge. So as Hans mentioned, screening can fulfill the need for early detection of glaucoma. As you could have seen, the disease is also quite well visible in colorfulness images when looking at the optic disc, which you can see enlarged here. And then AI solutions can help making the entire glaucoma screening process much more cost effective. And so there are AI solutions for doing automated glaucoma screening. However, we see that at the lab performances that are promising are quite often much lower in real world scenarios. So Beat et al. Described their observations when deploying an AI model for eye screening in a real world setting. And what some of the people who worked with the AI system found and said was that it gave guaranteed results, but even when some image was a bit blurry and the reader could still read it, the human reader, the system couldn't. And something else that someone said was that it's not as accurate, and even if the image is a little bit obscured, the system couldn't read it. So apparently the quality check was too strict in the opinion of nurses, and that caused quite some frustration. Moreover, image quality varied highly across locations, settings, and the experience of the operator. And so in real world settings, different types of image quality can be expected depending on where and by whom an image is taken. And therefore, algorithms should be able to tell when it can grade an image or not, even when it has not seen certain types of ungradability during training. However, it should also not be too strict. And so in short, being able to assess the ungradability of images well, that's quite important. And so the aim of this challenge was to develop AI solutions for glaucoma screening using color fundus images that are robust to real-world scenarios. The data that we had for this has already been touched upon shortly by Hans, but I'll give a bit more details. The training set that we provided for the participants consisted of no referable glaucoma images and referable glaucoma images. We had about 98,000 no referable and a bit over 3,000 referable glaucoma cases. And then for the test set, we also had ungradable examples. So the participants actually had to come up with a solution for grading, while they did not have this available for training. And then the evaluation pipeline looked like this. People provide an algorithm that I upload to our evaluation platform. So they do not run their algorithms on their sites and then on our test set, but we run their algorithms on our test sets on our site. And the first part of the performance evaluation is for glaucoma screening. So just the ability to distinguish glaucoma from no glaucoma images. For that, the algorithms needs to have two outputs, a glaucoma likelihood between 0 and 1, and a binary decision on whether the patient had glaucoma. Then there was the robustness part, for which they needed to output some scalar that correlates with ungradability. So a higher value indicated a higher likelihood of ungradability, and then also a binary decision. And then for the glaucoma screening, we had two metrics: the partial area under the receiver operating characteristic curve from 90 to 100% specificity, since for the screening problem, we are especially interested in high specificities to not overload the healthcare system. And the sensitivity at also a high level of specificity, namely 95% specificity. And then for the robustness, we calculate the ungradability AUC to measure how well algorithms can distinguish gradable from ungradable images. And then from the binary ungradability decision, we calculate Cohen's kappa. Then we rank all of the participants based on these 4 metrics. And then we take the mean of these 4 individual ranks. And that's then the final score with which we determine the final winners. Then the different challenge phases that we had a preliminary test phase 1, in which no metrics were computed, 20 submissions per day were allowed, and it only consisted of 10 images. So it was more a kind of sanity check to check whether images gave the expected outputs. Then there was the second preliminary test set, to which only 3 submissions were allowed. Since it already contained ungradable data, it consisted of 10% of the test sets, and it also computed all of the metrics. And then there was a final test phase, which consisted of 100% of the test sets. All metrics were computed on it, and only 1 submission in total was allowed. So now, where did all of the participants that joined come from? We had 350 teams officially signing up. Of course, not all of these teams actually submitted a solution, but you can see the distribution from where all of these teams came from in this image. Then these are the teams that submitted to the preliminary phase 1, to phase 2, and then these ones submitted to the final test phase. And all of these actually competed for the prize. Then up to the anonymized participant ranking, you can see that this final score looks like this. If we look at the glaucoma screening performance, you can see that the best partial area under the curve was about 0.9 for screening and about 0.85 for the sensitivity at 95% specificity. And then for robustness, you can see that the best performance was almost as good as the performance of the graders. In terms of kappa, was a bit over 0.8, and the best AUC was quite high, about 0.98. Then here you see what happens if we combine the different algorithms and take the mean of their predictions to form an ensemble. So on the left, you see the participants sorted by partial area under the curve. And then on the right, you see that it actually increases and is most optimal if you use the first 3 submissions. And the performance increases a bit more. And the same for the area under the curve for ungradability. It increases a bit more even until combining the first 6 models. Then here you see the screening performance compared to all of the graders. So the graders here are depicted with this cross, and you can see that the top performing algorithms were about as good as the experts. And then you can see here the RC for ungradability, and you see that the graders combined were a bit better than the individual algorithms. Then here, another interesting thing to see is the best performance over time. So as you can see here on the x-axis, the number of days since submissions, that the number of days since the submission portal opened, and then the best performance up until that point. So as you can see, it seems that for the ungradability part, it took a bit longer to get in the high performance range than for the screening performance. And at the end, there was a big jump. So in conclusion, we organized a challenge for robust glaucoma screening with over 100K images. The top participants were able to achieve expert level performance And we showed that it is feasible to flag ungradable images, even if those types of ungradable images were not available during the model development, which illustrates the robustness to new screening settings.
Yes, and then I would like to give the word to Hans.
Thank you.
You will be presenting the final leaderboard. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Koen. Thank you. I'd like to share my excitement about the results, because when we started out with this project, we were aiming for a sensitivity of 75%. That was our goal. But the winners have clearly exceeded that, and we've reached a sensitivity of about 85% at the given specificity of 95. So I'm quite excited. Here you can see the leaderboard of the 4th to the 15th ranked groups. And I thank you all for your contributions, and it's nice to see from where all the people and all the groups come from. But I think we need to move on to the more interesting slide, and that is with the winners. We had envisaged 3 prizes, 1, 2, and 3, but it turned out that numbers, that the runners-up were equally good. So instead of having 3 prizes, we have a first prize, of course, and the second prize, which is a shared combination of number 2 and number 3. So what does it all boil down to? Those who win the second prize will get 1,500 euros in cash and $2,500 in AWS credits. The winner will get 3,000 euros in cash and $5,000 in AWS credits. So who are the numbers 2? First of all, I'd like to mention and congratulate the group by Fierskader et al. That's a mixed group of Germans and Swiss research workers, and they submitted their contribution, their solution, from the RWTH Aachen University Hospital. Congratulations, very good performance. And the other second prize goes to Temirgali Amishev and co-workers from the Republic of Kazakhstan. And they submitted their project from the CMC Technologies LLP. So the winner, who's the winner? That is the group led by He Wang, and you can see the name of the user group, and they come from Beijing, the Peking Union Medical College Hospital, and they've won the challenge, and they've reached an outstanding performance. So I'd like to congratulate all of you, because we've finally managed to get an AI solution for glaucoma screening under real-world circumstances. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd also like to congratulate all of the winners, and especially, as Hans indeed mentioned, their really outstanding performance. And so now we will go to the methods that are actually behind these participants.
Hello, my name is Satoshi Kondo with Muroran Institute of Technology, Japan. The title of my talk is Computer-Aided Diagnosis and Out-of-Distribution Detection in Glaucoma Screening Using Color Fundus Photography. This is joint work with Satoshi Kasai of Niigata University of Healthcare and Welfare and Kosuke Hirasawa of Caricom Minolta. I would like to skip the introduction since the clinical program and the challenge tasks might already explained by the organizers. Here is an overview of our proposed method. Our method employs convolutional neural networks to classify input images to referral glaucoma or no referral glaucoma. In addition, we introduce an inference time out-of-distribution detection method to identify ungradable images. Our OOD detection is based on an energy-based method combined with activation rectification. I will explain some more details of the proposed method in the following slides. We employ LS for the classifying color fundus images. Since it is two-class classification, a single linear layer with two-channel output is attached at the end of the network instead of the final linear layer of LS. Our inference time OOD detection is based on an energy-based method combined with activation rectification. The energy-based method uses a scoring function based on energy instead of softmax to discriminate in-distribution and out-of-distribution data. In the activation rectification, the outsized activation of a few layers can be attenuated by rectifying the activation at an upper limit. After rectification, the output distributions for ID and OOD data become much more well separated. It is based on the observation that the mean activation for ID data is well behaved with a near constant mean and standard deviation, and the mean activation for OOD data has significantly larger variations across units and is biased towards having sharp positive values. We combine two methods to improve the performance of OOD detection. We consider pre-trained neural networks, which encodes an input X to a feature vector. We denote the feature vector from the penultimate layer of the network by Hx. The activation rectification operation is applied to the feature vector as equation 1. Here, C is the activation threshold. And the network output after the activation rectification is given by equation 2. Here, W and B are the weight matrix and the bias vector of the last layer of the network. The energy of the model output is given by equation 3. Here, Fy indicates the logit corresponding to the ith class level. Finally, the OOD scoring function is given by equation 4. Here, tau is the energy threshold. Here are the experimental conditions. We use 200-layer LS pre-trained with the ImageNet dataset for our base network. We divide the dataset into 5 folds, and 5 models are trained by using different combinations of the folds. We use the cross-entropy loss as a loss function. Since the dataset is imbalanced, we use the weights given by the inverse of the frequencies in the training dataset. The thresholds C and tau are decided by using a validation dataset for each model. For the activation threshold C, top 10th percentile of activations estimated on the validation dataset is used. For the energy threshold tau, bottom 5th percentile of energies estimated on the validation dataset is used. The experimental results of the preliminary test were: for classification, the partial AUC was 0.857 and the sensitivity was 0.787. For OOD detection, the kappa score was 0.359 and AUC was 0.863. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Firas Kader, and today I'll give a short talk about the methods we used for the AIROGS challenge. As probably has been mentioned by now, the AIROGS challenge consists of a dataset that contains approximately 100,000 gradable fundus images, and the tasks are to develop models that can detect preferable glaucoma on these images and to decide whether the images provided in the test set are gradable or not. In order to tackle these tasks, we split our approach into 2 steps. In the first step, we focused on the glaucoma detection part of the challenge and based our approach on the way ophthalmologists would handle this task when provided with color fundus images. As they almost exclusively only look at the area around the optic disc to detect glaucoma, we mimicked this approach by first annotating a bounding box around the optic disc for approximately 3,200 images, and then trained an object detection network, in this case a YOLO V5, to find this region of interest for all the images contained in the provided training set. So after extracting the region of interest, in a second step, we did some pre-processing on this ROI because we noticed that some images had a very low brightness and thus detecting glaucoma got more difficult. So what we did is we first transformed the images into the HSV space, the hue saturation value space, where we rescaled the values in the value channel to a range between 0 and 255 and subsequently applied the histogram equalization in this channel. The preprocessed images were then used to train an ensemble of different CNN and transformer architectures to form a likelihood score for glaucoma presence in the images. The second task, to detect the ungradability, was a little more complicated because we were not provided with any information about how ungradability manifests itself in the images, and we were told that all images in the training set contain gradable images. However, when looking through the images for the bounding box annotation part, we noticed that some of these images are hardly gradable. For example, in the top left corner, you can see that no optic disc is visible in the image, and therefore we would assume that it is harder to grade. Additionally, as can be seen here, some images are very blurry, or the optic disc is only partially visible, which would also make them hard to grade. Therefore, we based our approach for ungradability detection on whether an optic disc can be found, as ophthalmologists primarily use its morphology to detect glaucoma in color fundus images. In this sense, we used the confidence score to give us a first hint about whether the image is gradable or not. So if the confidence score of the bounding box detector is high, which means that it has very likely found a region of interest with an optic disc inside, we reduce the likelihood for ungradability. However, if the confidence score is low, we increase the likelihood for ungradability. This is included in the first term here. As mentioned earlier, we found that some images in the training set were already hardly gradable. Therefore, we inspected some of the images contained in the provided training set and labeled images that were very blurry or where the optic disc is only partially visible or even not visible at all as ungradable. Additionally, we labeled images where the optic disc was clearly and sharply visible as gradable. In this way, we constructed a dataset that consists of approximately 600 ungradable images and 2000 gradable images, and then trained a simple CNN classifier, in this case EfficientNet, to give us a score about the ungradability. In a final step, we combined these two scores to form the final ungradability likelihood score. In order to form the binary decision on whether the image is gradable, we had to find an appropriate cutoff point. So what we did is we visually inspected images from the whole range of the ungradability likelihood score U and found that a cutoff point of 1 led to the best subjective results. So if the combined value here is below 1, we label the image as gradable, and if the value is above 1, we label the image as ungradable. Using this approach for the final submission, we achieved evaluation results for the glaucoma detection that are on par with other top-performing competitors. In this case, we achieved a partial AUC of approximately 0.88 and a referable glaucoma sensitivity at 95% specificity of 0.84. For ungradability AUC, in fact, our approach was the top-performing approach among all other methods and achieved an ungradability AUC of 0.98 and for the ungradability kappa of 0.78. Looking at our method, we have shown that by a simple and intuitive way that mimics the approach of ophthalmologists, we can achieve a very good performance. Our next steps are therefore to evaluate this approach on other datasets and see how well we can transfer the results of our trained networks on these datasets. Additionally, we have implemented some other methods for detecting ungradability. However, due to the limited number of submissions, we were not able to test them, and thus would like to try them out once we get the chance. All right, that's it. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Hi everyone, my name is Edward. I'm presenting on behalf of the Schulich Applied Computing Medicine Club, and we're here to talk to you about our approach to the glaucoma screening in AIROGS Challenge. I won't focus on the teachers of the challenge because you already know that, and instead focus on our technical workflow. So our workflow starts with an initial cropping. Then we isolate the optic disc, and finally from the optic disc we predict glaucoma and estimate ungradability. The initial cropping is very straightforward. We just do a very simple thresholding. The only caveat I would say is that for the images where the optic disc or the full fundus image was cut off, we added some padding because we wanted to keep the image square and we didn't want to lose any information. And that's what you can see on the left. On the right, we didn't have to do anything fancy at all. The literature is pretty consistent that if you want to detect glaucoma, you look for pathological changes at the optic disc. So we knew that we needed to, in order to build a good model, and especially because we didn't have the resources to train a huge network, we needed to be very specific what we're looking at. So we tried initially to isolate the optic disc using heuristic methods. We know that the optic disc is bright on the red and green channels. We know it's approximately spherical, and we know that it's not too big or not too small. So using those, we can go from the left to the right. So from the left, we detect the bright images. So that's on the right. You can see that the true optic disc is detected, but there's also some noise on the left of the image. And we can filter that out by picking the bright area that's spherical and within our size range. That's how we get to the optic disc. Now, we only got about an 80% hit rate, which is pretty good. And this is estimated just by going through the images and looking at counting about in the first 100, first 200, how many of them were probably detected, but not great. So we decided, okay, time to bite the bullet and actually build a neural network. The thing about the neural network is we weren't provided any training labels about where the optic disc was, so we had to generate our own. And we did this by manually labeling the first 277 images from the optic disc detected by the heuristic method. The heuristic method is very, very generous about how it crops an optic disc, so we just kind of tighten that up and grew some bounded boxes. Then we trained a model on those images and used it to detect 1,700 new images. We inspected those 1,700 images. We found that 300 were unacceptable, and we manually relabeled them. So now we have 1,700 images, 1,400 of which were automatically detected, and 300 of which were manually relabeled. And we used them to retrain the model, so just iterate, and we did that process again. And there were, out of 2,000 images that were detected, 200 were unacceptable. At this point, we could have iterated again, but we decided, we have enough to try training our YOLO model. So that's about 3,700 images, 800 of which were manually labeled, and we trained our model. And yeah, that was clearly enough because our estimate hit rate is now greater than 99%. Here's an example of the images where out of the first 134 images, the optic disc is detected in every, take my word for it, they're all there, I checked, but the optic disc is detected for every single one of them. So very, very early on graph from early on in our process, this shows that essentially the YOLO model is better than the heuristic method. No real surprise there, but it's kind of nice to see our hypothesis borne out in the data. When it comes to the actual machine learning, we divided our 101,000, I believe it was 442 images into a training set and a testing set. 95% of the images for training and 5% for testing. Out of that training set, we needed to do hyperparameter tuning for all our different models. So we further divided that 95% of the training set into a further 95% and a 5% validation. For classification, it was very, very straightforward. We used 5 different models that you have all used and know about. They're convolutional networks, so VGG16, DenseNet, EfficientNet, SEResNet, and Inception. For calculating ungradability, we don't actually detect ungradability on the optic disc. We trained our autoencoders, a variational autoencoder standard and a standard non-variational, just normal autoencoder on the full cropped phonoscope image. And for ungradability, it's just the product of those multiplied by the scaling factor of the mean prediction and also the confidence interval of the YOLO model, whether or not it thought it could detect the optic disc. Here are our results. I'll walk you through kind of what we did for the first, second, and third, and also the final phase. And we did make some changes in our final phase from our third phase because we wanted to try and improve our results. And you can tell from the leaderboards that kind of backfired a little bit. In our first step, we didn't have inceptions. We had the 4 models minus inception. And the EfficientNet variant was B5 variant. And that gave us pretty good results. In the second phase, we added inception in and we changed B5 to B7. And we found that this actually improved our results by quite a bit. And then in the third phase, we took out VGG16 just to experiment with because it didn't perform as well as the other models individually. So we took it out and then it actually did improve our score in the third phase. And finally, we didn't make any changes to the model. We actually added VGG16 back in. And we also did some test of augmentation, essentially just flipping horizontally and flipping vertically every single image. And while that did improve the metrics on our internal testing set, it actually dropped just quite a bit in our final submission. So I'd just like to talk to you about some of the limitations of the challenge, and I know that all of you will have shared very similar limitations. So the image size is the first one. We're limited. I believe we only used like 256 by 256 for most of our images because there's a lot of images, and based on our resources, we weren't able to build very big networks. Another thing from our end is that the YOLO V5 model was trained on images from the internal test set, and that led to some of the overfitting that you can see in our results. Finally, in the future, we would like to train the autoencoders just on the optic disc instead of the whole image. In hindsight, we should have done it to begin with because we already had the optic discs, but live and learn. So, thank you.
Hello all, my name is Teresa Araújo and I will present the solution of my team from Medical University of Vienna to the AIROGS challenge on glaucoma screening. So the vast majority of the existing classification methods are not robust to auto-distribution cases and provide overconfident predictions, and the most common approaches such as the Monte Carlo dropout and ensembles are not task-specific and thus their performance can be subpar. Other common approaches such as supervised outlier exposure may lead to overfitting to specific kinds of OD, and thus our contribution is an uncertainty-aware deep network that predicts a Dirichlet distribution on the glaucoma class probabilities. To the best of our knowledge, this is the first time this type of approach is applied in the medical field. So our base model is composed by the first two blocks of the Inception V3 network in order to obtain a smaller receptive field, and you only use the challenge dataset for developing the algorithm, so no external data or annotations. The dataset is split in 80% for training, 10% for validation, and 10% for test. Our method models the uncertainty following the evidential deep learning approach, and the main idea behind this is that for a given sample, a belief mass is attributed to each class K from a set of mutually exclusive classes, and each belief mass is equal to the evidence for that class divided by the total evidence, which is the sum of the evidences for all classes. The prediction uncertainty is then given by the number of classes divided by the total evidence. As does the uncertainty is inversely proportional to the total evidence, and in the extreme cases, in case in which there is no evidence, meaning all belief masses are equal to 0, the uncertainty is maximum, or meaning it's equal to 1. The evidence is modeled by the Dirichlet distribution via k alpha parameters, with alpha equal to the evidence plus 1 for each class. The class probabilities come directly from the mean of the Dirichlet distribution parameters. To then find the binary decision on the problem of the gradability of the image, we assume that the diagnosis is only possible if the OD region has enough quality, since the glaucoma main structural manifestations occur usually in this region, and to do this we artificially create out-of-distribution images by occluding the regions in which the GradCam map probability is greater than 0.5, since these are the most likely locations of the optic disc. We then choose the threshold based on the ROC curve for separating inliers from the outliers. The training loss is composed by two terms based both on KL divergence. The first aims at increasing the evidence for the correct class by reducing the divergence between the predicted alphas and the theoretical maximum alphas. And the second penalizes the divergence from the uniform distribution for uncertain cases. The final loss is the sum of these two terms, with the weight of the second term increasing as the training progresses in order to avoid the premature conversions to uniform distribution for the misclassified cases. In terms of results, here in the left we show the distribution of our test set images accordingly to the predicted uncertainty, and we see that the Dirichlet histogram seems to be more bimodal than the softmax one, which suggests a better separation between in and out of distribution samples. These OOD samples, as I said before, were generated, as can be seen here on the right, by occluding the regions most activated by the GradCam, and the uncertainties for these images are indeed higher than for the original ones, and for the images that have a different region occluded, which shows that the uncertainty is a viable metric for identifying non-diagnosable images. Here we show the results of our Dirichlet network and softmax in our development test set and also in the final test set of the challenge. Both networks have similar classification performance, but Dirichlet has higher kappa for ungradability assessment, suggesting its superiority for OOD detection. The performance dropped slightly from the development set to the final test set, as can be seen here in the table. In these examples, we can see that not only images with good quality are well classified and with low uncertainty by our method, as is the case of the first image, but also bad quality images, as the ones from the bottom row, can also be correctly classified by our algorithm with low uncertainty. And this is because despite they present blur, bright artifacts, and low luminosity, the OD regions are still visible and thus images are still diagnosable. In contrast, in the second image, the OD is not as visible due to high brightness and thus the uncertainty is high. In image C, we have an uncommon glaucoma manifestation that was scarce in the training set and thus the network considered it to be an outlier. So, in sum, we propose a novel method to the AIROGS challenge which, based on the Dirichlet distribution, allows to estimate both a referable glaucoma probability and a prediction uncertainty. And importantly, the method does not require explicit supervision for OOD cases, being capable of detecting these while maintaining high performance for classification. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any question, I will be available later to answer them. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is He Wang from Peking Uni Medical College Hospital. Today I'm going to introduce our work, a workflow for computer-aided diagnosis of glaucoma. This report contains the following 4 parts. Now, I would like to briefly talk about the background of glaucoma. Glaucoma is a group of eye diseases, often characterized by elevated intraocular pressure, and is the second cause of blindness worldwide. As shown in this figure, a typical pattern is progressive peripheral visual field loss, followed by central field loss. Structural abnormalities of the optic disc or retinal nerve fiber layer can be found for patients suffering from glaucoma. To facilitate clinicians with rapid and accurate computational aided diagnosis, the AIROGS challenge was held to exploit solutions based on the color finder's photograph. In this challenge, we developed a diagnosis workflow to automatically diagnose glaucoma and distinguish finder's images with low qualities. To force the model's attention to the optic disc area, we manually annotated 40 images with optic disc and retinal vessels. 100 images with relatively poor image qualities from the provided training dataset were selected. We first trained a model to segment the optic disc. Secondly, a U-net was trained to segment vessels. Then, if the optic disc was successfully detected, the image is cropped to the optic disc area. Otherwise, the full image was fed as the input. The cropped images were cut into patches and run through the vision transformer model to give the final diagnosis. 2 vision transformer was trained to deal with the whole image and the optic disc image, respectively. Finally, the segmentation of disc and vessel are used to distinguish poor quality images. Here, we show the automatic segmentation of ungradable images, which is highly abnormal. Therefore, we trained a ResNet to assess the abnormality of the segmented vessel. We test the proposed algorithm on the testing set. Results show that we achieved the partial AUC of 0.8998 and the sensitivity of 0.8533 at 95% specificity, which outperformed other methods more than 1% on both AUC and sensitivity. As a result, we got first place in the diagnosis of glaucoma. For ungradable prediction, we also achieved second and third place. Finally, we got the first place by averaging ranks among 4 tasks. The first 4 lines showed the attention maps of 4 non-glaucoma images, and the last 4 lines showed the attention maps of 4 glaucoma images. By visualizing attention maps, we found there is additional attention in the upper optic disc border, indicating the enlarged optic cup. All images showed high attentions on the superior and inferior of the optic disc. The first 2 lines showed the attention maps of 2 non-glaucoma images, and the last 2 lines showed the attention maps of 2 glaucoma images. By visualizing attention maps in the whole image, we found there is additional attention in normal images. We guessed that no fiber layer defects inferior to the optic disc are more important to diagnose glaucoma from the whole image. In conclusion, firstly, we propose a workflow for computer-aided diagnosis of glaucoma. Secondly, we brought up several points of clinical concern by attention maps. Thirdly, we achieved the partial AUC of 0.8998 and the sensitivity of 0.8533 at 95% specificity, and got the first place at the AIROGS challenge. That's all for my presentations. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Yes, okay, so those were all the presentations from the teams. And now we have about 8 minutes left for a short Q&A session. So if anyone has any questions, they could raise their hands, I think, probably. And I think we would then have to unmute them, but the ISBI moderator should correct me on that if I'm wrong regarding that. And in the meantime, I have a few questions for the teams. So the questions can be about these team presentations, but of course also about the challenge in general. So let's see, I think I saw Virskader in the from the Aachen University in the chat. Yes, perfect. I have a question for about your presentation.
Sure.
So you said at the end that you had some additional methods for ungradability that you would like to try out. Are you willing to give a few hints on what kind of methods those would be?
Yeah, sure. So we thought of using anomaly detection-based methods instead of just going for the confidence score and a pure classifier. So we had one thing prepared with masked autoencoders with transformers and then the reconstruction loss, and another one using normalizing flows because we looked in the recent anomaly detection literature and found that these were the best performing methods as of now. So we have implemented these methods already, but we didn't want to risk the score degrading, so we didn't test them out on the final test set.
So you did try them out locally?
Locally, yes.
Submitted. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, we to check whether they work for ungradability, we tried to create our own ungradable images by just taking available images and making them very blurry or whatever, and
then based on that, the method that you submitted was the best out of the ones you wanted to try out.
They were
Okay.
similarly performing. It was hard to make a decision whether it would really work better. So we just had to visually inspect them, and they were all very similar. And then we opted to use the most simple one to make sure we don't mess up on the final test set, because we couldn't verify the results.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Then I see there's a question in the chat from Amit Sethi. I think it's for us as challenge organizers. The question is, was the test data in some way different from the training data, apart from introducing ungradable images? For example, were the images taken from a different camera or center? So no, all of the gradable images, they were sampled from the same data sets randomly, basically. So there should not have been an inherent difference in the gradable images of the test sets compared to the training sets. Yeah, although there are a lot of different centers, but we had some ideas in the beginning when organizing this challenge to also make some splits based on center or camera, but it was quite impractical to do that because there was some missing data from which camera each image came and from which center, so it was hard to make a split regarding it. But we think that would have been interesting as well, kind of as another part of detecting out of distribution cases and better simulating a real world setting. But yeah, unfortunately, we could not do that. I see Koen Vermeer has his hands raised. Let's see, can I? Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe to add to that, while the images came from the same distribution, there was a difference in the prevalence. So there were relatively more images with glaucoma in the test set than in the training set. And we did that in order to be able to assess sensitivity and specificity with a certain confidence. So if you were to calculate predictive values or other things that depend on the prevalence, you would get very different results from the training data than from the test data.
Thank you, and good to see that the test set only the test set had the ungradable images, yet these could be detected with such high accuracy.
Yes, we think we're indeed very happy with that, to see such a high ASC for ungradable image detection, not even without providing ungradable images. Yes, then unless anyone else has any questions, I also have a question for Hee Wang. The last presentation, are they here? I think I do see the name in the chat, but I'm not sure where they are able to speak. Okay, through the chat, I guess that's fine. Yeah, so I think your ungradability method was mainly based on segmentation of two parts. First, the optic disc detection, which I think makes a lot of sense, of course, with glaucoma detection, but there was also the vessel segmentation. Of course, it has a bit to do with the disease, but slightly less. So do you have any indication of which part of the ungradability detection was more important? So either the vessel segmentation or the optic disc segmentation. If you do any translation studies for that, maybe. Of course, it would take a while to type the answer, I can imagine. Maybe in the meanwhile, I can also ask another question to someone who maybe does have their microphone available. Yeah, so Edward Wang. Oh, okay. Well, Edward Wang, are
Yes,
you
hi.
available?
I am here.
Okay, good. Yes. So I also had a question for you. So you mentioned that you estimate the hit rates a few times, right? I was wondering how you did that exactly. Could you elaborate on that a bit? Did you quantitatively do that, or kind of eyeballing the folder maybe that you showed? Yeah.
Yeah, it was basically an estimate of the first 100, 200. I would go because when I was doing the heuristic method at first, I was having to tweak things to keep improving it. So what I was doing is I was going over and estimating. And at first, like in the first 100, it was probably closer to 90%. But because I was tweaking things, I didn't want to overfit. So for the heuristic method, I think 80 is a conservative estimate. The goal of that is just to differentiate between that and the YOLO V5 model, which is like, I think in total, there was like 30 images in the testing set that it had a confidence of less than, like it just couldn't detect. And I'm sure that the other team that also uses YOLO V5 would have like the same experience where it was really good at finding the optic disc.
Yeah, nice. Okay. Yeah, about the YOLO V5, I think when you showed that plot during training, it looked a bit like the AUC decreased during training, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. So yeah, that was a very, very early graph. The value you have on the AUC there, it's actually like it's the entire AUC and not the AUC, like the partial AUC. So it was like an inflated score. And this was just like I think this is just a training variance, like a random snapshot. I don't actually have a comparison using the partial AUC because by that point we'd already decided to scrap the heuristic model. The purpose is just to show that the YOLO model is better, which is unsurprising.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. Let's see, are there any other questions from the audience? If not, I'm also, I see we're over time, but I'm not sure whether that's a problem. So I think it's nice to keep the discussion open. Otherwise, I think maybe we can ask another question to Teresa if she is there.
Yeah.
We should end the session. I think the moderator just said. So maybe it's good to. I'll ask you that question offline.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Then well, thank you very much for participating, everyone. And hopefully you enjoyed the session.
Thank you very much.